let's just see if there are any questions. I don't have any like quick minute update. So except that seems like COVID is everywhere. My family is all sick. Mr. Fauci is sick. We have lots of people at GW sick. So stay safe, friends. Good news, everybody seems to be sick mildly, which is good.
Yeah, that's what I've been noticing is it's people who don't even seem to feel overly sick, which is a blessing.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to tell everybody happy Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Which is why I have holiday brain.
Well, I guess
I heard a study talked about on NPR this morning that from England that suggested that there was less long COVID with the latest.
Yeah, that's what's
post-Omicron.
Yeah, that's what's expected currently, I think. I would be cautioning making early assumptions, but it just feels that way. It looks that way. So hopefully it stays that way. I think the biggest concern is really, is this, like, where is this going to go next? You know, I think that's really the more of a problem at the moment. I mean, are we going to hit something else again? And is this going to mutate again? I think that's really the sort of unknown.
How about kid vaccines? Little kid vaccines.
Yeah, so this is over my pay grade. I don't feel comfortable talking about it, you guys. You probably heard that I chose not to vaccinate 13-year-old, and he has the mildest symptoms. He just fully recovered after 48 hours. He actually, we thought he had allergies, and then they sent him home from school because they're like, oh, you're sneezing, do a COVID test, it's positive, go home. And then everybody else got it except for me at home. So, that's not a good example, of course, but my point being is I'm not very clear. I don't feel very comfortable talking about it because part of me feels like that we're overdoing it. And I think kids should be vaccinated targetedly, not as everybody gets it. I think healthy kids, I'm not convinced that everybody has to be vaccinated, at least now. I mean, I think before when we had a pre-Omicron, who knows, now it's a little shifted, so. Yeah, but I mean, again.
There are a number of questions in the chat.
Oh yeah, let's do that. So we keep on time. Yeah, that's exactly right, CJ. COVID seems to be like everywhere. So, I'm kind of curious as to if you turn on the news or if you read, it's not very obvious that we're in a massive surge. But if you look at the numbers, they're pretty steady. So they're slowly rising for the past many weeks. I think that we're at the phase, which kind of reminds me of when I was in Israel in March, when I talked to some people there. They're like, oh, COVID, yeah. Like they're all quadruple boosted and they're all get COVID on top of that. And it seems like a mild cold to them. So they're like, they don't wear any masks or anything. It's just, they're just living their life. I think we're finally starting to reach that point. But again, I think it's just because of Omicron, because it's so much milder, not necessarily because the vaccines for the newer variants, we're waiting, both Moderna and Pfizer, and I talked about this before, they're claiming that they're going to have Omicron specific boosters in late summer. That's what they're saying. We'll have to see. And then actually, if that happens, they're probably going to potentially, they should work better. So they should actually be at least partially protective completely against getting it, since they will be more specific to Omicron. But again, we've been like waiting for that before and it didn't materialize. So I would not speak to it until I see it. All right, I don't see any other questions. Just more of a comments. So. All right. Well, maybe if anybody still have questions, still put them in the chat, but we'll move to Dr. Frame has nutrition updates for us. And
wait a minute, Misha.
What?
You have to tell them about your t-shirt.
Oh, thanks. I think I have more of a brain. So everybody pay attention to what I'm wearing. GW Integrative Medicine t-shirt. So we are having our own merch. Highly recommend. Pure cotton, feels great. I wear it. Okay, I shouldn't say that, but I wear it all the time. So it's probably already needs to be like, can't wear it to events.
Can you show them the back? If
How
you're
do-
going to
how do
model.
That's not very easy here. I didn't
There we
know that there is a
go.
back.
It's the skyline of DC.
Very cool. So very good quality, very comfy. The link to purchase in the chat. We'll repost it before the end of the day. And all proceeds go to the center, and there's a donation, correct?
Correct.
So it's actually tax deductible. So with that, Dr. Frame, take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I am going to share with you. So this week I was at the Fabulous Nutrition 2022, the annual meeting of the American Society for Nutrition, which is really the preeminent nutrition research society internationally. So this is an international conference, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about, but I knew there would be something that would pop out that I was like, I need to tell everyone about this. So this is what happened. They've started doing this thing called the Great Debates in Nutrition. And what it is they pick something that maybe there's some controversy or some confusion about, and they have someone present the for and someone present the against, and then they have a discussion at the end, try and like come to some sort of consensus, and they publish all that. So all of this actually has been published in the literature. And there is a press release as well, which Janet will include in the email. But you could always look at my Twitter because I've got it all right here, the big highlights. And I'm going to walk you through what we talked about. So what was the topic this year? Ultra processed foods. Now, I was excited about this topic because I think they're not good for you. So I don't want to say I think this is a great topic. I don't think we should be eating these, and we shouldn't be eating them a lot for sure. But there is still some controversy about that. So let's talk about what that controversy might be. So it was chaired by David Ludwig and Christopher Duggan, who are editors for the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. So this was very well moderated. Give them a big shout out. And then what did we talk about? So the first thing here is they showed that if you look at the literature, so PubMed is where everything is published. If you just look at the number of publications that use the term ultra processed or ultra processed foods in it, it's really gone up in the last few years. So this is 2009 and this is 2020. So over a very short period of time, we've really seen a big peak in publications on that. And I will tell you, I published right over here in 2019 on one. So I'm gotten into that wave as well. So there's something to it. People are curious about it, but we don't actually have all the research. So this great debate.
Can I ask a very basic question? And
yeah.
I just realized I don't know the difference between ultra and just processed.
That is coming in the future. We will talk about that. That's a great question. That's part of the issue, actually. So in this debate, they had Carlos Montero, who's a researcher who's actually studying the food matrix and ultra-processed foods. And I've talked a little bit about that before with you, but just to give you a, overhead view of what the food matrix is, it's the idea that foods are not simply the sum of their parts. Oop, and there's my cat, Penny. So if you took a food and you disassembled it into all its parts, like as you would if you maybe had a supplement, and you took those supplements, it wouldn't be the same as just eating that food. So let's say you have an apple. There's all sorts of great things in an apple, but just taking supplements that contain all the things that are apples is not the same as eating an apple. And so that's the idea of the food matrix and it being beneficial. And the issue here is that ultra-processed foods are actually altering the food matrix, and that's part of the concern. And so what are they doing to the food that is changing the way they are nourishing us? And so that's what Carlos Montero studies. And then we had Arnie Ostrup, who I have to tell you is generally pretty pro-industry and pretty pro-food processing. So he was a really good pro person for the ultra processed. And Susan Roberts then was the discussant, but actually I won't be mentioning her much during this. Okay, so we started off with the yes, and the idea was really, can we talk about ultra-processed foods to inform the dietary guidelines? So that's really where a lot of this question centered on is, do we know enough about them to say, okay, everyone in America, you shouldn't be eating these, which is a higher bar than for me to sit here and tell you that you probably should be eating them for them because they're probably not so great for you. We really need to understand a lot more about them to say, everyone in America, don't eat these. So that's part of this debate here, is have we reached that bar yet? So first, let's talk about what are ultra-processed foods. And this is an excellent question from Dr. Kogan. So in order to define an ultra-processed food, it's generally agreed upon that we use the NOVA classification. What is the NOVA classification? It's got these 4 groups. One is fresh or minimally processed foods. So they would be things like milk, whole grain oats, rice, things that are either the way nature intended them or very close to the way nature intended them. Then you have processed culinary ingredients. And this one's a little bit problematic, and you'll start to see why, because we've got things like oil, butter, salt, and sugar. And while some of these are maybe not super processed foods, we know that in high amounts, some of these can be problematic, even though they're only a level 2 in NOVA. Then level 3, we have processed foods. Now, these are not really a problem. These are things like canned. Canning is something you can do at home. Or there are things like frozen or perhaps even fried. It's more of a cooking method or a preservation method, but that's not an ultra-processed food. The difference between processed and ultra-processed foods is really that you can't make ultra-processed foods at home. We don't have the technology to do that because it's an industrial formulation. They're either deconstructed into different chemical constituents and then have these things added back to them, or they're combined in different ways. Basically, they're going to be something that you wouldn't recognize out in nature, right? So you've got soda or highly processed white bread, Oreos. These things are often very delicious, highly palatable, but they're really not what nature intended us to eat. So that's the really big difference between classification 4, which is what we determine to be problematic, ultra-processed foods, and everything else. We'll talk a little bit more about that, though. So there are actually also markers that you can use to identify ultra-processed foods, which maybe make it a little easier for you as an individual person to figure out if a food is ultra-processed or not. One would be food substances of exclusive or almost exclusive industrial use. Again, these are things you can't get at home. So like protein isolates, casein, high fructose corn syrup, fruit juice concentrate, invert sugar, maltodextrin, soluble or insoluble fiber. There's one that maybe we could, I don't know, is that going to be terrible for our health or not? It's hard to say. But there are things you're probably not adding at home. And then definitely hydrogenated oils. We could all say that those are not healthy. And having those ingredients in a food basically means it's ultra processed. And a lot of those are added for mouthfeel or to extend the life of a substance or to actually alter the nutritional panel. So for instance, if you're adding in a protein isolate, sometimes they're adding that to increase the protein on the nutrition facts label. But that's probably very different than, say, having a whole edamame out of the pot. The other category is cosmetic additives. So these are things that are added to change the taste, the flavor, the texture. And these ones I think are super clear that these are ultra processed foods. So if it's got any added artificial flavors, any flavor enhancers, colors, emulsifiers, sweeteners, thickeners, anti-foaming, bulking, carbonating, foaming, gelling, or glazing agents. All of these are really not going to occur in nature, and those are excellent markers for what an ultra-processed food is. Now, there may be some instances where we could argue, is this truly good or bad? But I think when we're talking about this in general, this is a great way to look at whether it's ultra-processed and maybe you should avoid it or at least limit eating it. Moving along, the amount of ultra-processed food in our diet have increased over time. And this was really my reaction in real time to this graph because it's very alarming. You know, if we're talking about 2005, 2013, even these are relatively large numbers, 16% of total energy intake coming from ultra-processed foods. That is too much in my mind. But here we are in 2017, 2018, the US, we're now at 58% of all calories are coming from ultra-processed foods. I think it's pretty safe to say that's too much. this is problematic. And so maybe we need to reel it back in. And this could be a really good argument as to maybe why this should be informing the dietary guidelines for Americans, because clearly America has a problem with consuming too many ultra-processed foods. So if it goes directly into the dietary guidelines, now everyone knows, okay, you shouldn't be consuming these, and hopefully this number will start going down. Okay, what else do we need to know about all of these ultra-processed foods in our diet? Well, what happens when you increase ultra-processed foods in our diet? You increase added sugar and you decrease fiber. I think you all know me well enough to know that that is not good. Obviously, the added sugar isn't good. That can lead to things like poor glucose control, food cravings, but really the reduction in fiber scares me the most. It decreases satiety. You're now not feeding your gut microbiome. And if you aren't taking care of your gut bugs, they can't take care of you. So you're going to have a leaky gut. You may have autoimmunity. You might be more prone to infections or allergies. Not good things. And basically, to me, this says ultra-processed foods are not good, period. End of statement. But there is still a little bit of debate to be had here. And in conclusion, for the pro, let's get rid of ultra-processed foods group, over 30 cohorts have actually already linked. Now, it's just an association, so we can't say it's actually correlation, but they've linked ultra-processed foods to numerous disease states. All of these disease states down here, none of them are things that you want, and almost all of them are chronic diseases. So if in theory we could lower ultra-processed food intake and lower chronic diseases in America, I'm very pro that. So I'm probably leaning towards the pro, we should include ultra-processed foods in the dietary guidelines. But now we're going to switch to the other side and be fair. Oh, one more point. This has also been confirmed by many meta-analysis. And for those of you who are not scientists, this is kind of the gold standard. This is the highest level of evidence you can reach. And basically it means when you pool all the information from many different studies together, it strengthens that information. And if it confirms something, you are much more likely to think that that is actually the truth. So this looks to be actually the truth. And it is for also what's called all-cause mortality, which is a really important marker of something being very causative and very important, because it means any cause of death, right? So anything you could die from, this makes it more likely. So if you're not afraid of obesity or cardiovascular disease or anything from that previous list, any reason that you could die, ultra-processed foods makes that more likely. That's a reason I'm probably not going to eat ultra-processed foods. I don't know about you. Okay. Oh, no, that's right. So part of the argument against ultra-processed foods is that perhaps it's not really the ultra-processed foods that is doing this. It's things that, like nutrition or displacement of whole foods in the diet. It's a shift of what we're eating. But the argument is actually that that's exactly what's wrong with ultra-processed foods, right? The high sugar, the low fiber, potentially high sodium, that is part of what is wrong with ultra-processed foods. So that actually is causing the effect as opposed to confounding, which means confusing the effect. So it's not a confounder, it's not confusing, it's actually the cause of the effect. Oh, wow, I have more on this than I thought. Okay, so I really think this is the last one. So they're also, they have all these bad things. They have too much sugar, they have too much sodium, but they're also locking a lot of those health promoting components. And I've talked to you a little bit about phytochemicals before. So one of the things they're often lacking is phytochemicals because they're actually stripped out in the processing. But then they also have other things that are actually potentially harmful, like BPA, acrylamide. They may have quasi-addictive properties, right? So these foods are more highly palatable and it's hard. They say with Pringles, you can't eat just one, or Lay's or whatever it is. You can't eat just one, right? They've been designed so you mentally cannot eat just one. That was not an accident. And so it is much harder for our brain to turn off eating these foods. And that's been shown in scientific studies too. This is not just like my opinion. Those additives are really concerning. The amount of energy intake. So because you can't eat just one, you're eating a whole bag of Lay's or whatever else. And the amount of energy you're intaking is very high. They've been shown to hamper your blood sugar control. You don't feel as full after eating them, which also adds to having too many calories. This one's a little bit arguable, so I'm going to skip that. But the one that I really get excited about is the gut microbiome. So these foods have been shown to be pro-inflammatory by way of the gut microbiome. So basically, your gut microbes don't like these foods. They make them angry, and when they're angry, your gut gets angry, and everything goes haywire. So you really want to limit ultra-processed foods if you can. Now, whether the whole country needs to limit them, we can still debate that. So in summary, the question is, do we need to know the exact combination of mechanisms for how ultra-processed foods cause these diseases before we recommend people stop consuming them? That's kind of the question here. And then the response would be, well, but do we need to know the mechanism if we know that they are causing disease? Does it matter how it happens? And the example I would use is smoking, right? So when smoking was clearly linked to lung disease, we didn't wait until we understood exactly the mechanism of how that happened to tell people to stop smoking. We immediately said, okay, no, you need to stop smoking. And then we figured out the mechanism so we could better treat lung cancer. And so I would tend to agree with that. It's better to limit your consumption of ultra-processed foods now. And then if they aren't going to cause all of these diseases, well, it's not the end of the world, right? But if they are and you're still eating them, that's not great for you. Okay, so now on to the rebuttal. This part is really short, actually. So the main rebuttal is that processing is really poorly defined, which is a fair point, as are the ingredients that cause foods to be ultra-processed. That's also kind of fair. We don't fully have all of these defined at this point. And then also there's no threshold for these ingredients. So if we don't know exactly what the processing is, exactly what the ingredients have to be, or how much of them there has to be, how do we actually define what an ultra-processed food is? And that's a fair point. If we can't define the problem, how do we really study it and say what the problem is? The other point is that maybe ultra-processing is actually just a marker of a poor diet, like we were talking about with nutrition. It's really just people aren't eating healthy. And perhaps we can actually define these with regular nutritional terms instead of ultra-processed. We don't need the ultra-processed term. We could just say, oh, it's highly palatable, it's very energy dense, it's low in fiber and whole grains, it's high glycemic index, and it has excessive energy intake. All of that will describe this. Well, I'll tell you the problem with that rationale is going back to this slide and this study here from Kevin Hall, which I talk about all the time. It's a great study. They actually tested that and they showed that that was false. It's not just the nutrients. It's not just the hyperpalatability. There is something really unique about ultra-processed foods that makes people consume more of it. And they really highly control. These people lived in a hospital for 1 month and were given everything they could eat. And it was matched for carbohydrate intake, protein intake, and fat intake. They were allowed to eat as much of it as they wanted. And the people that had the ultra-processed foods ate much more. And then the really great part was then they switched. So people who were on the ultra-processed food went to the non-processed, people that were on the non-processed went to the ultra-processed, and the same thing was observed. So it wasn't something unique about this group of people. Ultra-processed foods cause you to eat more, they cause you to gain weight, and they cause increased inflammation, and it's something unique to those products. So I'm going to say that this argument doesn't really work for me. It doesn't really jive. And then it went on to have a lot of discussion and it was really good. And I'm not going to cover that because it gets like really in the weeds and really into details, but I will open it up now for questions from you about either ultra-processed foods, this debate, whether we should be talking to all America about this, or if it's really more appropriate for just us to be talking about it.
There are a couple of questions in there already.
Okay.
I think starting with what is NOVA and erythritol. I think it's by Sarah.
Oh, I see. What is so NOVA is the classification system that 4-stage classification system, and you can look it up. And erythritol is an alcohol sweetener. So the argument for that one as to whether it's highly processed or not is actually debatable, because in theory it exists in nature, but we've now distilled it down and put it in much larger amounts than you would typically be exposed to. And that's where we get into this argument of like, do we really know what we're talking about? How much of that is too much? erythritol, if you have too much of it, you will know because you get diarrhea. So it's very easy to be like, okay, that was too much. Not unlike magnesium. So it's not necessarily inherently bad, but defining what a safe exposure level has really not overly been done for many of these. And that is part of my argument about ultra-processed foods. Is we need to do that research. We need to know what safe levels are. And right now we are not doing it. Or when it was done, we didn't even know what the gut microbiome was. And now we know it's playing such a large part of that it really has to be included in this research.
Thank you. Can I follow up with that really quick as well?
Sure.
I think this also probably applies to honey and maybe even maple, like how that is also debatable as far as processing goes.
Well, honey is definitely minimally processed. Maple,
Is that what you said?
honey is definitely minimally processed, right? It's
Oh, okay.
it's simply extracted. You just take it out of the comb. It's no different than when the Hadza go and they take the comb and they suck it out with their mouth. It's exactly the same.
Okay.
But maple syrup does require boiling. So that would be, I mean, that's something you can do at home. That's definitely minimally processed.
Okay, thank you.
However,
one
when you get it at the
caveat
end,
though
go ahead.
about honey, and this is from Misha, who is a beekeeper. Make sure you're buying your honey from a beekeeper, because if you're not, there's a chance that they could be putting corn syrup or other highly processed
Yeah.
sugars into the honey. It's apparently quite common.
Yeah, there's a whole documentary about that on Netflix, actually, which I highly recommend.
Yeah,
Honey
it's
is actually the most
very-
counterfeited food.
It's very pathetic, and it actually took decades for U.S. Agriculture Department to cut on what was happening. But it's a little bit better now, apparently. But it's still, you need to think that at least half of all the honey out there is not real honey. It's a mix of honey with some crap.
Yeah, so I see there's a question about meat substitutes, and that actually was a whole separate session at Nutrition 2022, talking about the quality of meat substitutes and whether they're ultra processed or not. And I will tell you that session was very biased because it was sponsored by the soy industry, which was very pro alternative meat burgers. But regardless, let's just think about if all the components, the nutritional components of a food are the same, and we're already concerned about it, right? We're concerned about too much red meat in the diet. And if you're now switching to a plant-based version of that burger, which pretty much has the same components, right? It's about the same amount of saturated fat, often the same amount of sodium or more. I don't know why we would expect it to be any better. So that's one point. The other point is, it has not been shown that these foods are consumed more quickly or in larger amounts than their counterpart. And that may be because they are actually designed to mimic their counterpart, whereas most ultra-processed foods are actually designed to be their own thing, right? Like the Twinkie is not mimicking anything. It is its own thing. And so it's a little unclear exactly how and where they should be put. And that was part of the argument that was made, is you have these products which sound like an ultra-processed food, but don't look like an ultra-processed food, and maybe don't look like an ultra-processed food in lab results either, at least in the short term. It becomes a little bit unclear. But I would argue we just don't know enough about those in general to really make any statements, because we have no idea what they do long term. Nobody has studied them beyond like 8 weeks, which is pretty minimal when we're talking about food outcomes, right? We really need to know, I mean, ideally we want to see 30 years worth of consumption, but that's probably asking too much. But we don't even have a year of consumption of what happens with these foods. So we really don't know, let alone no one's looked at the gut microbiome with those. So talking about processed food and nutrition, that's a great question. The content of nutrition in these foods, it depends on the actual food. Some foods are fortified, and that was a hot debate too, whether fortification actually made a food better for you or if it didn't matter because it was refined. There was one group that actually said that you shouldn't have more than 50% of your grains as whole grains because you'd be missing out on enriched flour. And half of us fell over and almost died, and I was in that half. And then everybody else was like, that's interesting, because the nutrients that are in these refined or fortified products are typically nutrients that you should be getting from whole foods, right? They're things that come from fruits and vegetables. And so my argument would be it's much better to get fruits and vegetables than it is to get these artificially fortified products. For instance, breakfast cereal. That is like, RDs love breakfast cereal because it's basically a bowl full of multivitamin, right? Like it, and in that sense, it has a lot of nutrition. But when we think about the food matrix and we think about this ultra processed component, probably not the best option. It'd be much better for you to get it from whole foods. And time again, whole foods seem to come out. So I think that's what I would be leaning you towards, as opposed to looking at just the nutrition facts. And there was actually a whole nother talk about how we need to move behind the nutrition facts label, because it's not giving us all the information we need. Other than the fact that it has a nutrition facts label means it's already been somewhat processed, right? Apples don't come with a nutrition fact label. Oranges don't come with a nutrition fact label. So if it is coming with that, it has to at least have some minimal amount of processing. That could just be simply freezing, which is absolutely totally okay. That is actually probably preserving the nutrition and making it healthy for you. But anything beyond that, now you start like, what are they adding into it? Are they adding these guar gums or emulsifiers and the sauces they put in some of these frozen vegetables? So you want to get pure ingredients as much as you can. And I think I'm actually out of time.
Thank
So I will
you.
turn it over to you, Dr. Kogan.
Thank you, Dr. Frame. So, okay, so let's just settle in. We had a very wonderful conversation about nutrition, but I think in the second half, I think we should go back into our bodies and our hearts and our souls and get a little different nutrition, okay? So, start by just feeling our body. Make sure you're, if you're sitting on a chair, make sure your feet are on the floor. If you need to cross leg or feet on the chair, that's fine. But I think I invite you just to put your feet on the floor so you feel more steady and that you feel more connected to that you have directionality, top to bottom. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to do a quick purification breath. And those of you who've been doing this for a while probably remember it, but I'm going to walk you through the whole thing. So we're going to start with the earth breath. We're going to imagine our feet being planted on the surface of the earth, or you can even imagine them being grounded into the earth. When we inhale, drawing the air through our feet, energy and air up into the base of our spine, inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the nose. Exhale, think of that energy being returned into the earth. So this first part, you're connecting yourself to our planet. And the breath here is designed to really flow down and up. So you inhale, draw it up, and then exhale, draw it down. You can feel the heaviness of the earth. You can imagine being a tree or an object that's really deep into the earth, it's rooted, steady, heavy, but yet drawing the energy and sustenance from Mother Earth. Make sure your breath is deep, unobstructed, relaxed. It helps to release the belly. If you're a visual person, you can literally imagine that the energy is coming out your feet and then legs and then hips and into the base of your spine, bringing this grounded state into our bodies. And then exhale, you release any impurities, stagnation, any physical discomfort or pain or anything that's not serving you well. We'll take just maybe one more breath here. Transition to the water breath. So we inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth. Identify yourself with the water energy. Free flowing liquid state. It may be helpful to imagine being in the body of water, even if it's just your own shower. You can imagine the energy flowing down with it, washing your physical, your entire body. Sort of energetic shower, if you will. And here we concentrate in the middle of our bellies. On the exhale, letting the energy center there. When you exhale, you can release any impurities, ailments. You can imagine that the body trying to detoxify itself, which, by the way, it always does. It always tries to clean itself. So we are consciously making this process more aware. Of course, water is a universal detoxifier. Solvent. We are 60% by weight. One more water breath. Transitioning to fire, so we're going to inhale through the mouth and exhale through the nose. Drawing the energy up, feeling the fire in our middle of our chests. You can imagine that with each inhale, that fire grows. Exhale, you're allowing the smoke, ashes, anything that's been burned to be released. Fire is a symbol for purifying our hearts, our emotional states. And after we do elemental breath, we'll come back to the heart, because today we're going to concentrate on some of our states of emotional states. And so let's pay special attention to how our hearts feel right now. You don't have to judge anything, but if your heart feels heavy, or you feel uneasy or unsettled, you don't have to change that, but you can observe it and you can invite it for clearance. So you can allow the fire, the practice itself, to burn that unneeded, unwanted emotion, feeling. When you exhale, release it's not just like a smoke from the fire. Let's take 2 more breaths here. air, so in and out of mouth. Your breath starts to be more gentle, more subtle. We concentrate on our thoughts. We observe our mind without judging the thoughts, without following them. So if the thought comes, just let it be. It'll pass, just like clouds in the air, in the sky. You can concentrate on the forehead if you need location. Ask for release of any negative thoughts, any thoughts that just no longer serve you. Last breath is ether breath. We inhale and exhale through the mouth and the nose together. If that's hard, you can just inhale through the nose and exhale through the nose. And here we concentrate just above our crowns, and this is the element that helps us to purify our own relationship with the greater. Whatever you define as greater for yourself. You can ask for guidance here. You can ask for help or just observe. Observe your breath. Observe your comfort, discomfort. Letting breath itself guide you wherever. Let's do 2 more breaths here. So for this next part, even though what I want everybody to do is put a gallery view on the view box, look at the screen. You're going to see people to the left and to the right of you. So just put your left hand up like this, and then the right hand down, and literally look at the screen, and whoever's to the left of you, you're gonna sort of, well, you know what I'm trying to do, right? You're going to give them your left hand, and whoever's to the right, your right hand. So you're trying to connect all of us. Of course, if we'd be in a physical space, we'd actually do that. But this is more of a just, and if you don't see it, if you're just seeing a picture, just imagine a person there. So just we give it a second just to connect and feel that in reality, we're all connected, we're all linked. All right, good night. Lower your hands. Now I'll invite you into a little bit of a kind of a personal journey, if you will, a brief guided meditation, and you're gonna go into a difficult place. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If you'd rather keep them open, that's fine. So let's just take maybe a couple of breaths first. Tune to the place, time, person, your pet, anything that most recently you've had been grieving. You know, you may have lost your pet, as in my case. You may be grieving a relationship that's passed. You may be grieving a loved one, a family member. We're safe. We're in a space where we support each other. We just did the practice that allowed you to completely clarify your field, if you will, and your intention. So this next part, however short or long it is, we will try to take that energy of grief and learn to be more comfortable with it. And more importantly, really learn to understand that the grief itself is a part of our life. It's a state, a emotion, a energy, first and foremost. That it actually can be turned into something constructive. And so what we're going to do, once you picked your, let's say, a grieving partner, something that you lost, see if you can start having a gentle, slow conversation with it. You can say you love you. Yeah, I love you. You can say I miss you. You can just silently envision this link that you had, this deep connection. You may have some bright memories. And you may also have something negative come up. You may have guilt, sadness, pain, separation. Don't judge that. Just go into the state that comes to you. Part of our journey here for our time is not to hide or run away from things that are given to us. At the end, right before we're done, I'll read you a poem, as many of you know, by Rumi. Our job here is to take these moments of suffering or processing, whatever you call it, and make them a process of clearing your own mirror so that the love that you have gets polished. Without that negativity, so to speak, your mirror cannot be cleaned as well as possible. So out of this grief, out of the sadness, out of that negativity that you're feeling, see if you can realize that there's a bright spot too. You may be grieving, but you're also moving on. The object of your grieving has been released. You can ask, literally, you can just ask, how does it feel there? Wherever there is. In most traditions, in most esoteric tradition, when someone passes, they often talk about celebration, the life celebration, the wedding. It's because at the end of the day, that part of us that was so connected to the loved one is still with us. They're somewhere in the same field. We can connect to some, in some level, in some form. So they're not actually gone, they're still in our hearts. See if with your breath, you can deepen your state of presence. You can deepen this link. And even if you're still sad, if you're still feeling emotions of grief, see if you can start having uplifting energy coming. You can ask the one departed to gift you the state of deeper meditation, positivity of awareness. It may be helpful to relax deeper, helpful to lay down if you have to. Or you may feel the opposite, you may actually feel to move. If tears come up, don't judge anything, just let your body express itself right now. Critical part of anything that we grieve is to let the body do that too. It's not just our minds and hearts, but that our body is grieving the memories, touch, smell, taste, whatever it is. Acknowledge the loss. Acknowledge the way you feel. Acknowledge that this is the pain that you're feeling. This is part of the necessary journey. We have to pass through this gate to be prepared to whatever's next. So remember, we were doing the fire breath, so we will come back right now to the fire breath. So we will inhale through the mouth, drawing in this memory, drawing in the grief. And exhale through the nose. We'll let it get flowing to wherever it has to go, leaving the memories intact, but allowing the emotions to become more balanced, allowing our minds to be more in balance. And the energy that you start feeling from the breath itself, that there's this uplifting, rising energy. Hold on to it. That's the good stuff. That is the energy that the departing soul has given you. I'm not going to suggest to you how you use it. I'm not going to suggest that there is an answers here. But I invite you to sense that energy as loving presence. The stronger you feel this connection, the stronger the grieving. That means the more you love the person. So we'll take 2 more breaths here. I'm actually going to read a short prayer that is appropriate. So you, of course, all can sense that that's part of my journey, sort of my celebration of my pet. I had a feeling that would be a good thing to do that for everybody. And I'm going to read the prayer, and I'm going to pause at the name of the soul, and I invite you, if you feel like it, you can internally mention that soul that you were connected to. O thou, the cause and effect of the whole universe, the source from which we have come, and the goal toward which are all bound, receive the soul of which is now enfolded in thy parental arms. May thy forgiving glance heal his or her heart. Lift him or her from the denseness of the earth. Surround her from the light of thine own spirit. Raise her up to the heaven, which her true dwelling place. And we pray thee, grant her the blessing of thy most exalted presence, and may her life on earth become as a dream to her awakening soul, and let her thirsting eyes behold the glorious vision of thy sonship. This is the place which sometimes hard to come back from. So let's just do this so that we don't have anything left after this. So make sure you have space to raise your hand. We're going to inhale, raise our hands up, just like what James did yesterday, last time he was here. And then when you exhale, swallow, release. And then we'll do 2 more times. Inhale up. Exhale down. Inhale up. So I have more grand plans for today, but I felt that we're going to do this. Next time when I'm doing something, we'll talk a little bit about another difficult topic. So that has more to do with the way we think of our end of our lives, and do some practices around that. I would like some feedback, because this is not your basic mind practices. They're a little more deeper, a little more esoteric. If anybody feels that they're over the board, let us know. We can easily adjust. I don't have to do this. We have plenty of teachers, but if you do like it, let us know too, because this is for everyone. I think with that, I don't know if we have it's exactly 3 o'clock, so I think we should just say goodbye. And apparently it's supposed to be wonderful outside.
Bye, everyone.